Hello, I'm Toycat and welcome back to the second channel video. Today's one is going to be all about some introspection from my recent trip to North America. If you don't know, over the past week I was in Cancun, Mexico for a few days, and then I was also in Texas, to be more precise, Houston, Texas, for a few days after that. And honestly, my impression on Texas before going was wildly different to what I kind of left the state with, what I left my trip to Houston with, and I wanted to talk about it because honestly, I guess the perspective I gained from it helped me realize a lot about my, I guess, with the current situation with, like the UK and the union that it's in the European Union, it's interesting because Texas's place in the United States has a lot of parallels, but the differences that come from those parallels, the divergences from those equivalences, is something I find so interesting, and it's something I wanted to talk about in today's video. In case you want to hear my thoughts about this isn't going to be a full Geography of Toycat video, but I am going to show you some maps because I was in Cancun, Mexico. I was there, honestly, just because my parents were like, oh yeah, we're on holiday, you should totally come, you travel so much, why don't travel and come with us to a place? And I was like, sure, let's do it. And something I've realized, by the way, because I didn't really look much into it before I went, it was literally just one of those resort places where you go and you pretend you're just in the UK but with hot weather. Which, side note, if you complain about like flights are a bad thing all the time, I think actually like flights to a place where you're just trying to pretend you're at home but with hotter weather or whatever, that's a good example of something where there's a substitute good, and that's an example of like a type of air travel you can cut down on. I almost said Cancun, cut down, but you get the point that like like there's types of travels you can cut down on. This might be one of them. But while I was on the way to Cancun, Mexico, and got ripped off by a taxi at one point, because there's only one taxi company and they charge literally $100 an hour to take you somewhere, which is great. But while I was on the road on the taxi, I realized that the roads in Cancun, it has this effect that a lot of places have when there's just a lot of international stuff but not too much local stuff, and just the roads are just jungle forests surrounded by nothing but the occasional resort. You can see there's like a Haven Riviera, there's a Moon Palace. If you look on a map, it's literally just jungle, swamp, unusable land for the most part, where there's some resorts built by the beach. It's fascinating to see because, honestly, I know there is a whole side of tourism where people do go to places, not because they like the places, but because they like the weather. Weather tourism, you could call it maybe. I knew that was a thing, but I didn't realize like how extreme it gets, even in pretty developing countries like Mexico, for example, where look, there's a giant, massive, quite modern international airport that's just like, oh yeah, there's a city that's kind of big nearby, and then also there's all of these things everywhere along the coast because their coast is one of their valuable assets in tourism. It's a whole interesting thing that I could talk about by itself, but again, I didn't really learn too much about Mexico. I learned a lot more on my trip to Mexico City, but you can see that in a separate video, and people also complain that video is too long, so that's why we're going to move right ahead into the Texas part of the trip, because I flew from Cancun to Houston. And fun fact, actually, because I was looking up the list of flights from Houston, the most popular ones, and as it so turns out, I took the second and the third most popular flight. I took the flight from Cancun to Houston, and then the one from Houston to Heathrow. And yeah, it's funny because whenever you look at stats like that, it's like, wow, what a coincidence. Except if I do the most popular thing, it's clearly not a coincidence, right? But two, the other interesting thing about that is like, it's actually not a coincidence because if a route is so busy, if there's 670,000, there's probably more than that, like 700,000 seats going to Cancun from Houston, that probably means there's some overcapacity, and that's probably why fares go lower. Again, another interesting part of air travel that, like, if you actually want to address it as a market, you should probably consider that. Like, oh yeah, flight prices go down lower on routes where there's such crazy high capacity to meet high demand, but then you get the point in that way. And then also the reason I flew to London, which, again, I think it's crazy that this is the third busiest route to Houston. I'd never heard of anyone who'd been to Houston before. I guess there's that much money and stuff going in because so many airlines, even European ones, have direct flights there. But yeah, I flew to London, right? Which is crazy that that's a route with this many people going, more than even some of the domestic routes, it seems. But the interesting thing to me is the fact that I flew this flight, and it makes sense because yeah, it's got the same overcapacity thing of like, there's a lot of business travelers but not a lot of normal people, so I redeemed with points, I only paid taxes and fees, so yeah, I had a free flight and I had a cheap flight, which is why these statistics line up that way. It wasn't a crazy coincidence, but it's nice to believe anyway, like how it's nice to believe that Texas could be an independent country, right? This is something that on the internet you hear a bunch about, mostly because on the internet you hear it from crazy people who don't have real people to talk to, so they voice their extreme wild opinions that even people who agree with them are like, whoa, man, I think you went a bit too far there. And one of the things you hear about a lot on the internet is how Texas could totally go its own way. And a few people in Texas, I don't think I actually saw a single person properly advocate for this, but it's something that I think a lot of Texans, which is the name for people, kind of believe in. And the reason for that is because Texas, to some extent, has seen a lot of countries come and go, right? There's even a famous phrase like Six Flags over Texas. The country was Native American, the country was Mexican, the country was independent, the country is a part of the US and also was part of the Confederate States. I missed one of the Six Flags, I guess the Spanish owned it at one point, but there's been a lot of country changes, even in the past 300 years, so Texas kind of sees itself as like, hey, we're a part of this US, but we're not like all the way in, like we're like a little bit of the way in, and also it's the second biggest state in terms of geography, but also economy, which is the more measurable thing in my opinion, which matches quite interestingly with the UK in its political union, which is, by the way, I think as of this video, there's some crazy antics going on with Brexit, right? It's the same like story just happening in a very roundabout way that we've seen for quite some time already. But like the parallels between like the Texas, let's say, of the United States and between the UK of the EU, you might think like I'm making a stretch here. But again, from actually speaking to people from Houston, Texas, I learned a lot of things, and I want to dive into those. But because I want to keep you on the hook before I make interesting international comparisons, let's talk a bit about Texas. Because, again, a lot of people think that it can be independent. I think the actual argument is like, probably not, but it has the best odds of any state of making it that way. One, because it's the largest in the contiguous US. It's only the second largest state because the US owns a giant part of, like, if we ignore the barren wasteland to the north there, Texas is this giant state. It's bigger than all of its surrounding states. Unlike I think it's 10 states in that border Canada. I'm always shocked that it is 10, but there's 10 states in America that border Canada. There's a few that have kind of tricky borders with, Mexico. For instance, like Los Angeles, all of California is literally just California. There was two parts of California, Alta and Baja California, like high and low California, and it was kind of sawed in half, so there's a really uncomfortable border, for instance, here. But Texas has a natural border along most of its thing with Mexico, which, it's called the Rio Grande River. I learned this from a Minecraft video. You think Minecraft can't teach you geography? Well, guess again. Is this the Rio Grande, right? Oh, there we go. Let's see. This is, in fact, the Rio Grande River. It's a natural border, which is the reason, for the record, why walls aren't necessarily needed, because having a wall in a river is a questionable idea. But you get the point that, like, oh yeah, so Texas is pretty well defended in terms of, like, it has natural geographic borders for most of its areas, besides maybe the Panhandle. Texas also has one of the things people like to say is like, oh yeah, if you look at the electrical grids in America, there's like a giant western, electrical board, there's like an eastern one, and then there's a Texas grid. Even in terms of lots of different things, Texas does have its own resources, but the reality is the question isn't going to come up. There isn't widespread support for independence, and that's the thing I find interesting. But before we talk about that, because you know what, these videos, I need to have like some endpoint in mind, so that's where we're going to end it instead of start it. But the other thing I want to talk about is the fact that Texas is really big. Like, again, a lot of people like to pretend like, oh yeah, my state's so great, but from the outside, like, is it really that? And like, it doesn't really have its own identity in that way. But Texas was so different to every other state I've visited so far. If you want to see the list, actually, I think I can show it to you right now. This is the list of all the countries and states I visited, and you can see, like, compared to any of the other ones I visited, even Missouri, which is literally just up there a little bit, right? Or actually, Colorado is very close as well, now that I think about it. I didn't realize just how close Texas was to Colorado. But you see the point that, like, even the nearby states are wildly different. There is somewhat of a different independent, of different identity that comes from there. The people there were wildly different. I made friends in an elevator, and I still can't stop thinking about that fact. Like, I think talking to people in elevators is, like, literally a cardinal sin over here. But over there, I had a great time. I actually really did like the person, which is crazy that is a thing that is possible. Also, what is crazy that is possible is, again, the size of Texas I can kind of clarify and be like, it real big, it the second biggest state. But let's put it in perspective another way. There was a shooting while I was in Texas, because, America, that's a thing they're going through right now. They've got a mass shooting problem, and then the media reports it and makes it. It's a thing. It's an ever-lending cycle that, for some reason, everyone just accepts as a thing. Whatever. So there was a giant shooting. I think it was in Odessa. It might be in Odessa and Midland. Maybe there was two separate shootings. Maybe I just separately know something about Midland. But Odessa, Texas, which is named, if I'm not mistaken, after Odessa, Ukraine. Odessa, Texas had a giant shooting, and everyone I'd asked about it, they're just like, oh, really? All the way over there? Like, literally, it was so far away, it wasn't even really conceivable as part of the same thing. And I think, honestly, that's an interesting thing to realize, that sometimes you have a subdivision that's so big that you don't even think about other parts of it as really being the same thing as you. You know, everyone in, say, I don't know, let's pick a nice small state. Everyone in a Massachusetts, you know, maybe there's like a Boston rural divide, actually. But everyone in a Rhode Island, for example, that's a much better example. You know, if something happens in Rhode Island, it's probably pretty local to you. But even in a state as small, you know, in a subdivision as small as England, there were a bunch of floods, quite serious ones in Cumbria, if I'm not mistaken. And I looked at them in the news and I'm like, that's not even like a real thing that's happening. Like, it's so far away. And the fact that Texas is that big that, like, oh yeah, this is a really giant deadly event, but like, oh, it's over there, whatever. Like, the fact that that was a real attitude from quite a few people, I thought that was kind of shocking. And I could talk about different culture shocks and this and that, but, you know, the third channel's for more interesting things like that. But yeah, there really was a very interesting identity and very different way of doing things. Like, and you might think like, oh yeah, well, you know, they're super, like it's a super red state, right? When you look at the elections, they're like, oh, it's so red, so therefore they're that type of American, right? Like, I guess that type of American, right? That's what you picture. Because I mean, actually, his home state was literally Texas, right? That's what you're literally picturing when you're like, oh yeah, that's what Texas is. But the truth is like some part of the freedom that they love in that way, the freedom that they want, isn't necessarily just freedom in terms of like, oh yeah, we want to be, you know, like all the way right wing, because of the concept of you know, federations and the fact that they're in one. It mostly is just like, hey, why does the US federal government need to tell us what to do when the Texas state government already has so many laws, and then there's like subdivisions by county and then by city as well. That's to some extent what a lot of that is. And also one of the things that comes along with freedom is, I swear, I've never seen this anywhere else in the world. I saw it twice just in my tiny amount of time in a car in Texas. People just with giant, I can't describe this in a way that sounds believable, but their car was covered in anime stickers. It had loads of ridiculous weeb messages, and it was like, okay, that's just a thing that you can do over there apparently, and people are just okay with it. Like, express yourself, put your anime profile picture on your car. Like, I think having an anime, even a profile picture on the internet, that's kind of a wacky thing. They just put it on their car. Their freedom vehicle was covered in their expression of freedom, and it hadn't even been keyed. Like, not even a single time. And isn't that the craziest thing I think that's the craziest thing. Maybe you disagree, but yeah, I thought that was an interesting little thing. Also, here's just because I think the electoral politics of anywhere interesting. So here is Texas, right, in 2000. Here is Texas in 2000. That was a very loud sound in the background. Here's Texas in 2000. You can see, like, okay, yep, it's very, very red. But if you look at the actual map, it's like, yeah, that is that is very, very intense to see, even as the percentages go up. Because basically, eventually, you know, as best I understand, like, because I like following the US election kind of like it's a sport, as best I understand, the state is slowly going purple. Look at this. In 2008, you might be like, oh, they must not like them people that aren't the whites, right? But, like, you can see Obama did pretty well, like 55 to 43, as opposed to 60-40. Like, the gap's been slowly kind of, you know, thinning over, and you can see, like, recently, like, it's literally 9%, which is still quite impressive, but off that 9%, it still just means that cities are slowly flipping. Like, the map is still deeply red, because all the rural counties will... It's a thing you see in every US state, that, like, the truth is that states, you know, like, every single rural area is pretty red, and every single city area gets eventually blue. And you know, there's no red states and blue states. There's just states that are, you know, have a higher number of cities, and states without a high number of cities. That's why, you know, Montana is, you know, quite red despite electing, I want to say they elected a Democratic governor. That's why states like over here are all, you know, generally on that side, and that's why states with a lot of cities, such as you might guess New York, are going to be on the blue side. And the funny thing about Texas is that because it has so many big cities, 4th biggest city in the US, 7th biggest city in the US, 10th biggest city in the US, I want to say. You know, so many big cities in a little triangle too of each other. There's a very high urbanizing thing. And again, you might say right now, like, that's kind of crazy that, like, oh no, you can't take the reddest state and make it not a red state. But that's going to be one of the things that changes the overall makeup of the whole US as that slowly happens. But today's video, I said, was about some interesting realizations regarding Texas and its link to the UK and the Brexit thing. And the thing I thought, the reason I mentioned that is because I asked everyone I met there, like, so, Texan, American, which order do you put them in? Are you Texan first, American second, American first, Texan second? And maybe because I speak to young people, there's a skewed response there. I'll totally admit that, because I was in a city. There's a skewed response there. But these are people that love the concept of freedom. These are people that love the concept of guns. They're like, you can just walk into a porn store. They're meant to do gut background checks on you, but I could get you a gun very easily, Andrew. That was literally a thing that has been said to me on more than one occasion. But the fact that you can just the fact that these same people that love all these different things in that way also then said, oh yeah, I'm an American first. And I asked the reason, because sometimes I thought like, oh, it's going to be some patriotism thing or some this or that thing. But the reason that I heard from, again, the same reason from so many different people that it stuck with me, was that what they enjoyed about being an American was that not only could they have access to their big state, which they might not have left many times in their life, but if they wanted to move to another state, they totally could. Moving to a Colorado, moving to a New York, moving to a California, all of these crazy, even Alaska or Hawaii, all of these crazy disparate places. Like, I've got a whole separate side rant, but like, is Hawaii really a US state? Like, I know it legally is, but like, can we really call some islands in the middle of the ocean a US state? Like, I know they have interstate highways, but is it really an interstate highway? You get the point. We could rant on that another time. I'll talk about Hawaii in another day. But the fact that you can move to any of these places, and it's all domestic, it's internal, there's no real checks, right? The fact that it's all entirely free and easy to do, and same currency, same language, same everything, that was something which was like a big opinion shifter. Because, in reality, all it would probably take is popular support for Texas to go independent. Like, obviously it's against the US Constitution. There's definitely a law against it because of the whole Southern secession thing. But in reality, most countries ban countries leaving, but that doesn't stop all of the other independence movements in the world. But the reason that there isn't a heavy independence movement, despite the fact that people feel very, very Texan and very different to all the states and all the things around them, is because they like the ability to move to one of those places, and they like the commonality, the market, the economic benefits, combined with the whole like, oh yeah, there is a commonality and an ability to go there, which is, interestingly enough, listed as the reason, especially amongst people who are really pro-EU, as the reason they really want to remain. It sounded really stupid to me that, like, again, so many people I've heard in the UK are like, the reason I don't want to leave, the reason that they voted not to leave or whatever, was because, like, yeah, I want to be able to move to any one of the other 27 nation states. It also covers Norway, Iceland, and Switzerland, but that's a whole separate thing. I want to go to one of the other 31 states in that EEA area, and I won't be able to post-Brexit, right? That's a big concern for a lot of people. The idea that, that same thing that, lures people into a, bigger union because you're all the same, you can move around, etc., was one of the things that was a big reason. But it wasn't a big enough reason to sway the vote, right? Whereas Texas, if there was a vote today, it'd be like 90-10. Maybe with good campaigning, you could get it down to like 60-40. It's going to be heavily in favor of remaining in the Union, right? The United Kingdom did not choose to remain in the Union. And the interesting difference there to me, despite having the same basic issues, right? Again, it feels kind of separate. There is, unlike if Hungary wants to, actually, if Austria wants to leave, it's surrounded on all sides by EU member states. It would be suicide economically, and probably eventually politically too, right? In the same way that, like, Colorado or Nebraska can't leave, they're surrounded, what are they going to do? Texas has the geographic thing on its side, that's the same with the UK. It's the second largest contributor, so it has some leverage, not as much as the rest of the US combined, not even close, right? But some leverage. It does take a significant amount away. If Texas was an independent state, it'd be the 10th largest economy in the world. If the UK was an independent state, it would be the 5th largest economy in the world. Oh wait, it technically is. And but you get the point that, like, there's so many parallels, but the key difference there is that the opinion hadn't gone all the way. And that's why, that's where my kind of end of this thought came to. Because why is there a difference? Why do United Kingdom as Great Britain, as British people, why do people not feel as strongly about the need to, or the desire to move and keep trade ties with all of these other countries? And I think the thing I would say is that in America, any other American, even if they're from crazy places and have different opinions, there is a commonality there. People like to say the reason that you wouldn't have the commonality with a German, a Polish, Estonian or Bulgarian is because of, like, oh, it's the culture. People love to say that, like, oh yeah, there's a huge difference between, culture this and culture that, and, like, can't let this people in and that people in. But I think the bigger thing than culture, because, I don't spot any huge differences. Like, there's regional differences in the same way it is in the US. I think the bigger thing is actually language. The reason that every other country feels solidly committed to the idea of like, oh, yeah, in the Netherlands, they'd love to move to Belgium and Germany and Slovenia one day. The reason that the same commitment's not there, despite the fact that a lot of people do make the move, is because it's a heavily weighted, thing in the reverse. This is gonna say, it sounds arrogant whenever I say this, but the genuine truth is that English is a very valuable language. Not because of anything that English did, besides, I guess, making colonies in the United States, which eventually became a country and eventually exported all of that to the world and made it the lingua franca. But because English is a more common and, let's be honest, more valuable language in that way, there is a reverse effect where it is very easy for any EU citizen to move to London, but it's not as easy, it's not as doable, it's not as realistic, even if we ignore the economic downsides of moving to a poorer country, where you don't have any language advantages, because in a lot of those countries, it's not going to be, a thing you can make friends with, and, not every job's going to be able to take it just alone. That big language split where it's easy for any EU citizen to come to the UK, but it's harder, not hard, I wouldn't say, it's still very easy, but it's harder and less feasible and less imaginable, which, let's be honest, most Texans won't leave their state. Most United Kingdomers, most Bulgarians won't leave their state. That a lot of people like to believe that, like, oh yeah, if Turkey joins the EU, there'll be 80 million Turkish citizens in the EU, in the other states. And it's like, they don't all leave, not even a significant fraction leave, not even 10% or 5% leave. But the fact that it is possible, it's imaginable, it's a possibility, in a Polish person's head to come to the UK. It's possible in a Spanish person's head to come to the UK, but it's less imaginable for the most part in reverse. That, to me, is the interesting difference that you can spot between Texas with, again, the percentages on like how many people support independence is literally, it's crazy low, and versus the UK. I think the other thing is probably the fact that the EU is not a fully formed union. It's slowly trying to build itself, I would say stealthily, you might say cautiously. It's slowly trying to build itself up, and but in the process of doing so, it's one of the issues is dealing with the kind of rogue states. Not rogue state is definitely not the term, but a state that is a rogue, because I know rogue state definitely confirms something sort of terrorism, but like that's you have some outer edges that are going to be tricky. That's why Iceland is a big asterisk. That's why Switzerland is a big asterisk, and that's why the United Kingdom, again, there's a lot of stuff going on. I don't know what the actual time frame on leaving is, if leaving is realistically going to be a thing. But that's why the United Kingdom is already an asterisk and is about to become a bigger asterisk. And is that a good thing or is it not? I guess you tell me, asterisk police off the internet. But yeah, I hope you all enjoyed this video. I hope there was some coherent thought. I like Texas a lot, by the way. I didn't talk about that bit, but like, it was a swell time. I'd always like pictured I'd go to Dallas at some point, maybe even Austin. It was weird to end up in Houston, but like, yeah, I got to make the Houston we have a problem joke like 5 times. That was fun. Oh, I'm wearing a NASA shirt. This is what a fun little coincidence. I bought this in the UK, not in America. It would be cool to, wait, I can just say I bought it in Houston. I have pictures of me at the space station. This is my NASA shirt I got from definitely America and not H&M. Does it? Yeah, it's definitely H&M. That's what this is, because I liked the NASA visit I went on that much. Thank you very much. But yeah, thank you for watching this video. Oh, actually, no. You know, whatever. We're at 22 minutes. No one's going to care if it goes to 23, right? You want an extra minute of content? I'll give you a minute of content. So, yeah, I mentioned already that, like, yeah, Texas has the same problem as the rest of the US, where, like, hey, names are kind of confusing and strange. And, yeah, the major cities, they all sound kind of Texas, like Houston and Dallas and San Antonio and Amarillo. You know, is this the way to Amarillo? Something. There's a very interesting thing in that, I would say. But if you look at like places like Midland and Odessa, etc., they've got the stolen name problem. But even more than just stolen name problems, there's a lot of weirdly named places in Texas. Like, people would name a place and they'd be like, "Are you making a joke? Is there really a place called Big Lake? Is there really a place called Sheffield, Ozona, etc.?" And you might be like, "Okay, those are pretty tame." But look at Houston. You probably saw on the map earlier. Look at the suburbs of Houston and be like, "So what's going on right here?" There's Piney Point Village. There's Hedwig Village. Okay, maybe Hedwig's named after the Texan suburb. There's a place called Cloverleaf. There's like, okay, you look around, it's like, everything's a bit weird here. But the one that, I didn't believe this was real. There's a place called Sugarland. It's literally, it sounds like a theme park, and it looks like a theme park too. Wait, let me prove this point. I'm gonna go to Disneyland in Florida, right? It's Disney World, I guess it'd be. I'm gonna show you Disney World from above. It looks suspiciously similar. Is this a suburb of Orlando, or is this a theme park? I don't know anymore. I don't know what to trust. It is actually, it technically I think is legally a suburb of Orlando. There's a really fun fact with how that works, like how they're their own city, they have their own police force. I think maybe they're allowed their own nuclear weapons or nuclear power too. There's a really wacky fact with Disney World, but like, what's the deal with that? What's the deal with really America as a whole? There's so many weird differences where like government competes in a way that you don't you know, in the UK there's one government. I don't have a rival government I can try and sell my services to, but that almost is how it is in America, and I think that's wacky. Maybe you think that's wacky too, or maybe you think that it's not wacky, in which case I don't know, like this video, because if you're from the United States, which statistically something like 25% of you are, then I went to your nation. It was cool, wasn't it? Also, oh, actually, yeah, if you're in the comments anyway, don't talk about like, you know, don't be that crazy person who has an insane opinion that's gonna be way out from the norm and questions the Jews' involvement in World War II. But instead of being that guy who leaves that crazy opinion, instead, here's my list of states I haven't been to yet. On my list of like must go, I would say like Tennessee's quite high up there. I would love to go to Georgia. You know, there's a few states, the ones on the West Coast I haven't got to yet. They're like high up. They're gonna happen just as soon as I find a trip. Maybe even Louisiana, because like New Orleans is a big city that everyone always recommends. But if you know any of the other states, like, you know, I don't know how I'm gonna get to New Mexico otherwise. I don't know how I'm gonna get to Kansas or Nebraska. Any of the states that isn't one of the ones I just mentioned, if it has good skiing, because I love American skiing way more, or actually one of the Canadian states too, any of the states I haven't been to yet. Oh, I've been to Quebec. I can add that to my list now. Look at, see, oh, if you want to see how this works, by the way, it's like a tick map. I love it. It looks like kind of cool seeing the states slowly come in. But if there is a American or Canadian state/province I haven't been to, but you think it has like good skiing that you recommend for whatever reason, let me know in the comments. See, I give you some advice, you give me some advice, and then I say, second channel, don't care. Goodbye.